Baldur's Gate 3 again, but this time there are spoilers for the entire game throughout the video, so you have been warned. Throughout the interwebs, it has become a common complaint among Baldur's Gate 3 players that Act 3 isn't very good. Some people are calling it downright bad.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
And others are saying that it slowed their progress to the game so that they just stopped playing. If you take a brief scroll on discussion forums, you'll actually see that there is quite a lot of similar sentiment. There are a few people here and there saying great things about Act 3, but that seems to be the less popular opinion. As for me, I actually really enjoyed Act 3. I thought that it wrapped up a lot of the plot lines very nicely. I'm not without my problems with it. There are certain things that I would have done a lot differently, but, you know, it is what it is. And the game is still phenomenal and worth replaying 1,000 times. Now, some of the biggest complaints are either that it's too long, it's too short. I've seen people complain that there's not enough to do, and I've also seen people complain that there's too much to do. I don't tend to agree with a lot of these complaints, but my experience with Act 3 was a bit mixed. Mostly that as I was wrapping up all of the various quest lines that have been taking place throughout the entire game, the main quest felt like it was getting in the way, rather than being the thing that I was ultimately trying to achieve. Because you have all of these stories that are built up over the entire game with Shadowheart, Lae'zel, all of the other companions, and then you have Orin and Gortash showing up kind of out of nowhere and expecting me to care about them the same way? They were just too new to the plot for me to give them a priority. So this is where I'm going to get into it. Act 3 isn't bad. It's not. But it does slow down the whole game for its own sake. The events that take place in Act 3 are all still very good. Like, all the stuff with Gortash, Orin, it's all good stuff. Just not for the final act of a game like that. So my proposal would be to take Act 3 and switch it with Act 2. For a game that's called Baldur's Gate 3, it's a bit silly that it takes 80 hours to get to Baldur's Gate. In all of Act 1, people are talking about going to Baldur's Gate. The refugees, people that you meet on the road, they're all saying,
Tell everybody I'm on my way.
Will you stop?
Yada yada yada. People care about Baldur's Gate, and they're trying to get there or leave there. Even your own player could be from Baldur's Gate, depending on the race that you choose at the beginning of the game. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only way to get from the Grove area to Baldur's Gate is through the Shadow-Cursed Lands. And I say that's strange because the Shadow-Cursed Lands are known to be evil, known to be almost impossible to get through unless you already know how, and there's only a few people who actually know how to get through it, like the creatures that are following the Absolute and Halsin. In the first act, if you're saving the Grove instead of the goblins, you are essentially sending the tieflings on a hopeless journey through these cursed lands that have been cursed this way for, I think according to the game, about 100 years. So it's not like this isn't known. People know about the Shadow-Cursed Lands. It's just, why is everybody trying to get through there? It would have made more sense if right after Act 1, you arrive at Baldur's Gate. But I'll get more into that later. There's also the issue with Orin and Gortash being much better suited to be mid-game villains rather than end-game villains. See, they have this drama over which one of them is going to ascend or become the main chosen who has all 3 Netherstones to control the Netherbrain, which is all well and good, but ultimately the main quest doesn't end with either of them. You basically have to take them both out or deceive one, choose the other. I haven't done all the different playthroughs yet, but I know that there's a lot of options to do. But ultimately, they are not the end game, and they were never designed to be the end game, but the plot kind of treats them like they are until they aren't, which is why they would make better mid-game villains. Baldur's Gate as a location also works extremely well as a midpoint in a game like this. So Baldur's Gate as a city works a lot better as a more preparatory state for a final confrontation. And of course, Ketheric Thorm works way better as a villain than Gortash and Orin, especially as an endgame level villain. The guy has an entire undead army at his beck and call. He's also spoken about by people throughout Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Even after he's dead, he's still important to the plot. And the whole conflict with finding out just how to kill him, that is your classic big bad evil guy Dungeons and Dragons little adventure. Where with Orin and Gortash, all you really have to do is find them and kill them when they're vulnerable. Which you can do at any time. It's not like having an entire main quest level plot to get to a solution to kill him. It's like, these things are optional on how to kill them. But with Ketherick, it wasn't optional. You had to find the Night Song. And the Night Song was referred to throughout the entire first act, throughout the entire second act. It was a main quest level thing. The players had a personal stake in it as long as they kept Shadowheart around as a companion. And not to mention, Ketherick is actually a nuanced villain. He has both good and bad in him. And one of the best parts of Act 2 was that you felt like you could almost get through to him. That you could convince him to join the party and fight against the Absolute. It was just this intense moment that is missing in Act 3. And I would argue that these points are exactly why Act 3 felt like a letdown. Because you had all of this going on in Act 2, all of this endgame level stuff happening in Act 2, and then to get to Act 3, and now you're kind of dragging your feet to finish the game because nothing else is as interesting as what happened in Act 2. But like I said, I don't think that Act 3 is bad. I don't think it's boring. I just think it's in the wrong place in the story. Putting Act 3 in front of Act 2 does seem a bit like a monumental task considering all the story ramifications that it would have. But it's actually kind of simple. First of all, you just have to make Ketherick feel more like the big bad evil guy, final boss, villain, whatever, than he already was. Make it so that Orin and Gortash are threatened by him and want him gone, which they did. You just have to add that knowledge earlier in the story. Instead of going to Baldur's Gate as refugees of the Absolute, theoretically, all you have to do is make it so that you're arriving there as potential heroes. You see, in the shadow-cursed lands to the north or south or wherever you decide to put them, you learn that an evil being named Ketherick Thorm is preparing to assault Baldur's Gate with an army of undead monstrosities. The people in Baldur's Gate are scared of this. They keep hearing rumors of this thing called the Absolute without knowing that it has already infiltrated their borders in the form of Gortash and Orin. Once you have dealt with Orin and Gortash, who don't need that much development, by the way, because they're mid-level villains, you get to proceed and go on to the final act, where Ketherick Thorm, the man who's been built up over the entire game, is waiting for you. You can use Orin and Gortash to build up Ketherick as a more threatening villain. The deals that they're trying to make with you could be to try and get rid of him, to join forces because they're not powerful enough to take him on alone, which incentivizes player choice.
Excuse me, what's my motivation?
Of course, moving Baldur's Gate to Act 2 instead of Act 3 does require a few changes with the companion quests as well. For example, with Will, Mizora is saved from Moonrise Towers. Now, instead of doing that plotline, you could have it so that Will has to save her from Orin. Maybe she's obsessed and wants to kill a devil and to see how they bleed instead of her usual prey. Most everything else in Will's story can stay the same, because other than saving Mizora, he didn't really have much of a role in Act 2. And as far as Karlach is concerned, she also doesn't have a role in the original Act 2, so all you have to do is add Damon to Baldur's Gate and have him fix her heart there. Pretty simple. And then she can deal with the Gortash issue and go with you into Act 3 more resolved for what she has to do. And with Astarion in Act 2, he also doesn't have much of a role to play, except for meeting Araj Ablodra, or however you say that. You can even keep her in Act 3 if it's part of the Shadow-Cursed Lands to solidify Astarion's dedication to you, or divide his dedication from you. And with Lae'zel, she does have a pretty big part to play in Act 2, but it's not in the Shadow-Cursed Lands. You could keep the Crash in the same place and just have it lead to Baldur's Gate instead. And then for the finale of her story, just have it take place in the Shadow-Cursed Lands and enact whatever plans you had for Kithrak Voss. And the same goes for Gale. He also got a task in Act 2, but right at the beginning before you reach the Shadow-Cursed Lands. So again, he doesn't really have much to do in Act 2 anyways, so there's not much room for change there other than what was already planned. Getting his mission from Mystra in Baldur's Gate would work more effectively, moving the story forward up until you get to Act 3. Shadow Hearts is the most difficult because her path with the Night Song is all about becoming a Dark Justiciar, so it becomes rather difficult to throw those things around and mix them up. But you could do it. Have Ketheric show up at the beginning of Act 2 in some way in Baldur's Gate, prove that he's immortal, and then your task is to free the Night Song so that Act 3 can actually be done at all. It gives you something to build to while you're in the city, so that you can ultimately go into the Shadow Cursed lands knowing that there's actually hope for destroying him. And basically just swap the interiors of the two Sharan temples. And as far as Minthara is concerned, I know that in the original game, she was going to be punished in Moonrise Towers. Just make that punishment go to Gortash instead. That's all. And then you can save her, let her have her fate or whatever you choose to do with Minthara. And with Halzan, nothing really needs to be done. You can just swap the two acts and have his actions take place in the exact same way as they did before. And with all of that in mind, the rest of Act 3 can essentially play out in the same way that it did before. Except for a few more important side quests are pushed into the Shadow Cursed lands and vice versa. And perhaps saving the Tieflings happens because they were kidnapped on their way into the city and they never made it to Baldur's Gate. Picture it this way. In The Lord of the Rings, they start out in the Shire. A quaint little town, not much going on, and then they wander in the wilderness until they reach Rivendell. When they reach Rivendell, they have to make a decision. They keep going. The party then splits. After the party splits, Aragorn, this is the story that we're following, eventually arrives in Gondor. Gondor is like a big, massive city, just like Baldur's Gate. But there's a problem. There's an enemy on its way to destroy them from Mordor. A shadow-cursed land. So then at the end of the story, they go to face their foe in Mordor. That's essentially how I'm picturing this story playing out, with Act 2 and 3 switched around. You have Act 1 stay the same. Act 2 is now Baldur's Gate, a preparatory state to get to the third place, the Shadow-Cursed lands, where Ketheric Thorm holds all the power and you need to stop him. But it's too late. The Netherbrain is being unleashed. And then you can end the story in the same way, but I feel like this way, Act 3 doesn't feel like it drags. Instead, it feels like it's building up to something. Because the original Act 3 is building up to the final 2 hours of the game. But what it should have done is build up to an entire act. And yeah, that's all I have for you. Until next time. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more of my takes.